Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Supreme Court. Shockingly, the Supreme Court, this is temporary, I think, temporarily overturned, stayed actually, the Texas court ban of the abortion pill. They're going to, I guess, send it back down to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, where there might be a chance that it gets back before the Supreme Court, and they throw it out anyway. But for the moment, this medication will be available. It is not being banned by the Supreme Court. And I know the Trump judges are all upset. And I know the right-wing crazy folks all upset. I was expecting this from the court. We will see how, because this, as I understand, this happens. We're going to kick it back down to the lower court, let them make the decision, and then we'll see if we have to deal with it down the road. But for now, this is where it is. I have no faith in these six little authoritarians in robes making the right choice on this. But for the moment, still accessible, still legal. Now, what's interesting is since our six authoritarians in robes decided to, against what they said during their confirmation, overturn decided law, undid 50 years of decided law at the drop of a hat, what we're finding, and again, not surprising, but in the states that are going and banning abortion across the country and in red states, what they're finding is those states are having a really difficult time finding OBGYNs to come and do residency. In fact, the number, according to the Washington Post, these states have seen about a 10.5% drop in applications for people to be working these states. And again, this is going to make women's health much worse because these doctors don't just do abortions. In fact, most of them don't do any of them. But what this is doctors going, I don't want to get involved in the legal wranglings of deciding how to care for a patient. And this was a predictable consequence, and I think it's going to get worse the first time they do try a doctor and throw a doctor in jail for making a decision, which is going to happen. I think it gets much, much worse after that. So I just wanted to throw that out because that's kind of the big story of the day. The Supreme Court didn't do what some thought they would do. And this is one of these issues where what's amazing to me is you're talking about such a small percentage of the population that this affects. But everybody, seems to be worked up and in their camps about it. And as I've said, I'm kind of in the middle of the road in that personally I'm against it. But policy-wise, I think it has to be legal. It has to be safe. I'm not pro-choice, nor am I anti-choice. I'm pro-safety. As I've said, I've got two daughters. I want to make sure that they are safe, that they don't have to live like their grandmother's generation had to. That you're rushing to back alleys, that you're doing things that are going to be unhealthy and, quite frankly, could cost you your life. So for me, it's a much bigger discussion than just black or white. And especially when you start talking about all the other things that a bunch of old white guys know nothing about, I don't know that I want them making that choice. And if I were a woman, I don't think I would want that either. But I am curious your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Now, this is one of those things. Again, issues are complicated. Having conversations and discussions around how we as citizens do this thing called self-governance, this wonderful experiment of our country of citizens, electing representatives to go and do the will of the people. It's interesting to see how we're not doing well at it. And it's because we're siloed up. I've got my talking points, you've got your talking points, and we never had one of these moments. So I got an email today, and I do this occasionally, especially when someone says, I'm going to come get you. I'll be happy to talk with anybody. And so Matthew sent me an email saying that he wanted to chime in, that he wanted to, but he couldn't find the phone number to call and all this, and called me a coward. And okay, went into this whole he's going to challenge me and all this, and I'm like, yeah, that's great. Let's have a conversation, because I will talk with anyone, because I think we have to talk to each other. We have to come back to the public square. We've got to hammer out ideas, because I truly believe, and I've said this 1,000 times, I'll say it 1,000 more, I truly believe that we working people agree on much, much more than what we disagree on. That we agree on really a lot of the big stuff. And once we put aside the outrage candy that's being shoved down our throats, once we get away from the enormously well-funded outrage machine that's put in place to keep us in our silos and divided, that once we talk to each other, we figure out, you know what? I may actually learn something. I may actually agree with you. I know, right? And this is one of those moments where, we had this about 45-minute conversation that I'm going to put out on podcast. So tomorrow it will be up and available at 6 o'clock in the morning. But this is one of those things where we agreed on more than we disagreed. And all of one of us was surprised by that. And it wasn't me, because I'm of the mindset that we can find common ground outside of the political sphere, what happens in Congress. Because again, they've got moneyed interests that they've got to bow to. And money is a big problem in our political system, because there are things that, quite frankly, we can agree on. As I talk about all the time, my wheelhouse here, wages, hours, conditions. My wheelhouse is, how do we make workers' lives better? My wheelhouse is always, how do we help strengthen families and give them opportunities, keep a roof over their head and food on the table? How do we do that, and how do we do it better? But we're always fed these other things. And the gun issue was part of it. And this is what got my retired master sergeant friend to reach out to me and have this conversation. And it's one of those moments where, and I want to do this. So if you're one of those folks who, I hate you and I want to talk to you more than anyone, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I do answer all emails, and especially the crazy ones, because I think those are the people we can maybe have conversations with, and not always. I've run into some fives that are just so far off to the fringe, drank so much Kool-Aid that their eyes are colored. But I think most people are willing to discuss things once you tone it down. And as I said to him right from the beginning, this is not about me winning and you losing. This isn't a I win, you lose, you win, I lose scenario. This is, how do we effectively come together and figure out the right course forward? And look, we're not supposed to figure this stuff out. The abortion issue is a perfect example. If you don't want to have an abortion, don't. Nobody's forcing you. We've never had a policy that says, I'm going to infringe on your right and make you do this. I would never stand for that. But on the other side, you don't get to infringe your rights on somebody else's. And this is what's happening. You've got a well-funded machine that's imposing their rights on everyone else. And you look at across the spectrum, what are they doing to make lives better? In state after state, in red state after red state, what are we seeing? They're going after transgender people. And I've said before, not my issue. Don't understand it. Probably never going to understand it. But at the end of the day, I believe in life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. You do what makes you happy. As long as your rights don't infringe on mine, we're good. And I think we've forgotten this. I think we've forgotten how to deal with each other, how to talk to each other. And the gun issue, which is, again, why he came to me, he as well doesn't like seeing children shot and killed. Who knew? He as well thought it's kind of outrageous that someone's going to fire a gun out to somebody turning around in their driveway, or a kid rolling a ball into someone's yard, or someone ringing a doorbell or knocking on a door. We agreed on that wholeheartedly. Interestingly enough, we agreed that there should be gun control. There's always these things that pop up. And this is why I come back to this moment where we do need to have conversations, and we do need to figure out how we're going to move forward as a nation and get things done. Because while all of these side things are happening, while all this division's going on, we're getting robbed blind. We are getting robbed blind. And the question is what are we going to do about it? Are we going to continue to hate each other, continue to tear into each other? Or are we going to say, look, we need to do better. We need to elect people who are going to be better. We need to elect people who are going to stand up and fight for our ability to support our families. That's always been my true north. Want to hear yours? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Got a lot to get to today. Just so much stuff going on. Quick break. Right back.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So this, again, is one of these moments where there are opportunities, and we should be taking them at every opportunity. Let's go to the phone lines. Got CJ in Wisconsin on line one. CJ, how we doing?
Good, Rick. Thanks for taking my call. I guess I am a conservative, social moderate, so conservative fiscally, social moderate socially. I think Lindsey Graham's right as a Republican until we define what our restrictions are and reach across the aisle. Republicans are going to be defined by the Democrats and the media because really it's gone back to the states and it should be determined there. Or come up with, like Senator Graham wanted, maybe a national resolution. But I've evolved on this issue. It should be personally, I believe it should be a woman's right to choose, but there should be restrictions, not up to the day before it's born.
Yeah, but whoa, CJ, let me stop you right there, CJ.
Rape and incest, I believe.
Yeah, let me stop you here, CJ, because you've hit on something that's really a pet peeve of mine. There are not situations that when my wife and I had our 3 kids, we didn't race to the hospital on the day, on birthday, and the doctor look at us and go, hey, which way are you going with this? That doesn't happen. The only time late-term abortions happen is when the woman's life is in danger. So this idea that abortion's on demand whenever through the gestation period is just false. There's always been a 20-week limit. It's always happened.
No.
Yes.
Senator Chuck Schumer, the Democrats brought it to the floor, voted with absolutely no restriction. So the mere fact that you say that is not true.
No,
it
look,
I voted on
CJ.
by the Democrats with no restriction. And so, I believe there should be some. If you saw an ultrasound at 12 or 14 weeks, I think a person would beg to differ. Now, again, I think it should be a woman's right to choose, and it should be between her doctor. But there should be some, again, till the Republicans come together and define what restrictions they would compromise with, it's going to be an issue for them politically. But you brought up that the Republicans attacked transgender people. They did not. They believe in women and girls having the right not to have to compete against a biological man, because even though a transgender biologically, they're still it's not even questionable.
Now,
so
this is such
Republicans
see. Here's the thing.
Rights of women.
Yeah, here's
and
the thing,
girls.
CJ. Hold on. Here's the thing. Now you're taking two separate issues on this. In Montana right now, a transgender woman said that if you pass this bill outlawing gender affirming care for minors, they're going to have blood on their hands, and they have silenced her completely. Gender affirming care is much more than any of
That's a different issue than was just passed.
No, you said the Republicans aren't attacking transgender people. I'm telling you they are.
Well,
so you can't say in this situation I like it. In this situation I don't, CJ.
I discussed with the Congress just passed a ban on a biological man competing in sports against women, biological women and girls. That's a good thing. That's pro-women and pro-girl. And that's a separate issue, what you're bringing up. I would talk to you about that, but I'm talking about what was passed by the Republican Congress that's being promised to be vetoed by this president who is, I don't know what, the worst president ever in my lifetime.
Yeah, so you're going to go with that, and
so
this is where this breaks down, CJ, because you now want to go to this place of attacking the president. Here's my as a conservative, and you've said that you're a conservative. Are you not uncomfortable? Hold on. Are you not uncomfortable with the federal government using this law as a bludgeon where this should be at the community level? Do you know how many transgender athletes are, let's say, in the state of Ohio? There are officially 5. And do you know how many of those communities seem to have a problem with it? None.
You're okay with it. Well,
this is a situation where, again, we're looking for an outrage moment. We're looking to get people upset and angry and pitted against each other without even talking about what the issues are. And this is where my frustration is, CJ, and I appreciate the call. Thank you. This is where my frustration comes with all of this stuff. I am not arrogant enough to say that I know in every situation what we should be doing on this issue. Personally, in combative sports, I don't think transgender women should be competing. I don't. But this opens up a much bigger conversation around local rights, states' rights. What should schools do with this? This wasn't a big deal until now. It's the end of humanity. And it becomes this arguing point that diverts us from everything else. And this is my frustration in these moments. Again, I hope we can come to some resolution on this. There are pathways forward, but using the federal government, as my conservatives used to be against, as a bludgeon, I'm struggling with that. I'm struggling with that a lot. But again, I appreciate the call, CJ. If you got thoughts, I want to hear it. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I do answer all emails personally. This is, again, I want to hear your thoughts on it. My thought is this, and I've never really delved too deeply into this. As someone who played football, as someone played sports all through my life, I'm a purist. I am. I'm someone who, the way things have always been is how we have to do them. You throw that in with the knowledge of the transgender community that suicide rates are incredibly high. That depression and all kinds of things are really high in these communities. And if you had a child that, who knows, I don't know how I would handle it. But I do know I don't want the federal government telling me what I have to do or what I can't do. Again, I don't know what I would do. But I do know that the federal government is not the one in these private family matters that should be doing that. No, I mean, we can get into a whole bunch of discussions about, I played basketball. I was only 6'3". I played against a guy who was 7 foot. Should he have been allowed to play? Because he was so much bigger and so much stronger than me. I don't think that's a problem, but some people do. We can't have a conversation on that issue without people just yelling over each other. I don't know where we go. But you know what our elected leaders aren't doing? They're not debating this. They're not discussing it. They're imposing it. And you know who gets screwed over in all this? That kid that just wants to play sports. Now, do we create another entity? Do we create an intramural entity? I don't know what the answer to that is, because we're in a moment of change. And again, I'm not arrogant enough to think that I know everything, but I do know that I don't want people who are doing the things that I see our Republican friends doing. And you can't divorce the two things, the sports from the mere existence. You can't do it. And that's where a large bit of my frustration is in this. I've known people who have transitioned, and I've said this, a bunch of times. And when they've come to me and said, "Hey, Rick, I'm going through this. This is my name." I tell them the same thing. I don't understand it. Probably never going to understand it. But I hope this what makes you happy. I hope this what gives you your life, liberty, and your pursuit of happiness. I hope this is that thing that makes you want to wake up in the morning and be happy. Again, I'm not going to understand it, but I don't have to. I don't have to be the one who has to wake up in your skin. That's you. And I'm going to do whatever I can do to help you to lead your best life. I'm going to call you by whatever pronoun you want, because it doesn't cost me anything. It doesn't matter to me. If you want me to call you something, I'll be happy to do it. If I forget and I make a mistake, a correction is okay. And I will try and do better. Why is that such a big deal? Why is that so hard? I want those kids to be able to have opportunities. Do I have a problem with Leah Thomas, being so far out? Yeah, I do. But those are such minuscule moments. For me, I'm thinking about those kids who, with a suicide rate through the roof, how do we get them to be able to participate? That's my question. Instead of the hatred and the vitriol and the anger, the sheer anger, is there a way forward? And I seem to think there is, because there's so much more to this. It's like I said earlier, you got out in Montana, they're going to pass a bill that says, and the governor's going to sign it, no gender affirming care for any minors, knowing that it's not all surgery. Sometimes it's medication, sometimes it's therapy, sometimes it's who knows what. I don't know. But what I do know is I know the people who are pushing this through, these are not people that I want pushing this kind of division. These folks have enough problems. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I do answer all emails personally. And CJ, I do appreciate the call. Thanks so much. Got to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1967. That was the day the Taylor Law went into effect in New York State. It was celebrated for granting public employees the right to organize and elect union representation. But it's also roundly criticized for stripping public sector workers of their right to strike. It was crafted and enacted in response to the militant, victorious New York City transit strike of January 1966. The Taylor Act amended key points of the 1947 Condon-Wadlin Act, which first prohibited public sector strikes in the aftermath of a teacher strike in Buffalo. But strikes persisted, and the act was seen as largely unenforceable. In the aftermath of the 1966 transit strike, New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller appointed a committee chaired by labor relations professor George Taylor to make, quote, proposals for protecting the public against the disruptions of vital public services by illegal strikes, while at the same time protecting the rights of public employees. In addition to granting the right to organize, the Taylor Act also establishes impasse procedures for dispute resolution, defines and prohibits improper practices, prohibits strikes by public employees, and established the Public Employment Relations Board. But public sector unions argue the law gives no incentive for employers to settle disputes or negotiate contracts in a timely manner or in good faith. While public sector unions have struck since its enactment, Transport Workers Union 100 was subjected to harsh fines in both the 1980 and 2005 transit strikes. During the 2005 walkout, TWU 100 was issued a $1 million a day penalty, its automatic dues collection was suspended, and its leader Roger Toussaint was jailed for 10 days. The union continues to push for changes to the law. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
These days, America's top economic officials tend to speak in intelligible bureaucratic gobbledygook. But once upon a time, there was a plain-spoken White House economist, and he even had a sense of humor. He didn't last. Alfred Kahn was chastised by the White House in 1978 for speaking clearly and honestly about the looming possibility of a depression. Too blunt, use softer words. So Kahn started calling the downturn a looming banana. When banana industry lobbyists complained, he switched to kumquat. In that spirit, let me warn you about an unemployment taco that the autocratic Federal Reserve System is cooking up for working families. The Fed, as it's called by jolly bankers who run it, say it's imposing, quote, the restoration between supply and demand in the labor market. They soothingly add that there will very likely be some softening in the labor market conditions. You can almost hear them humming Rockabye Baby, but don't nod off. As Bryce Covert, the insightful economic digger and truth-teller, recently explained, there's nothing soft about the Fed's arbitrary policy. It means fewer raises and more people out of work, which means about 1.5 million people will lose their jobs. She documents that, historically, such a jolt of unemployment will probably, get ready for scary words, trigger a recession. Or a taco, if that makes you feel better. The mumbo-jumbo of economists aside, what we have here is the same old power play of moneyed elites putting the jobs and wages of working families on the chopping block to jack up the exorbitant profits of monopolistic corporations. When the Fed bankers say they're restoring balance, they mean restoring the power of corporate bosses to rule unilaterally over America's workaday majority. This is Jim Hightower saying, in plain language, this is blatant class war by the privileged few against the many.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, a lot of interesting reports coming out around Donald Trump and, the vision for a second term. And one of the stories I saw over at the Washington Post is, they're a more authoritarian vision of the future. And we've talked about what Trump wants to do with government employees and the F schedule and there was a story a couple of days ago and how he wants federal workers to have to pass a political test, which and I got to wonder, on that political test, does it have to come with a loyalty pledge? Is there got to be an oath to say, I will honor dear leader? What does that mean? Because I tell you, I'm concerned about returning to the bad old days of patronage. I think in a lot of cases we're almost there, but I fear it gets much, much worse. And here to share some thoughts on all of this and, the looming potential of a government shutdown, debt default, all of that. I've asked my good friend Phil Glover to come talk with us. Phil is the National Vice President for AFGE District 3. Phil, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks, Rick. I appreciate it.
So, this idea of patronage pops up, and a lot of people don't know what it is because we've been so far away from that kind of a system. But I hear Trump speak. I hear a lot of the right talking about we need people who are going to, do our mission and not the work of the people, but their work. And that kind of makes me worried.
Yeah, it kind of takes you back to the 1940s, I think, or before that. That's where apparently they want this government to go, where when they come into office, they can just get rid of all the civil servants and bring in people that think like them and talk like them and look like them, I guess.
Now, I was looking at this story about a political test, and now the argument is, we need people who understand what due process is and equal protection and free speech, and they've got this viewpoint of what politics should be. You guys are kind of barred from political stuff as a whole. This seems to be, I don't know, all over the map.
Yeah, federal workers are already covered under a law called the Hatch Act that limits our political activities, especially any activities on duty on government property in our official capacities. And then even outside of that, we're restricted on different things. So that's already there. This idea seems to stem, as he was leaving office the last time, he tried to come up with this Schedule F, where there's classes of federal employees. And so he tried to move a bunch of people into what he called Schedule F, which would be all at-will workers. He could just wipe them out for any reason, no merit systems protections, no EEO protections, essentially, just simply, we want to get rid of these people for this reason. And he could have done that. And, that really would have sent a chilling effect through the federal government.
And what does that mean for the average citizen? I mean, look, I've said a number of times, I don't want a political bureaucracy. I don't want the person who works at the DMV or Social Security or the VA, wearing their colors on their sleeves. I want them doing their job for we the people. I want a boring bureaucracy. I don't want a pendulum swinging back and forth every 4 or 8 years, filling those jobs with people who, one, don't know what the hell they're doing, and two, are there for all the wrong reasons.
Well, if you look at the agency heads that are selected and sent through the confirmation process, those are your political appointees. They get into the agencies and then they start to work on whatever the new administration's goals are, but they have to do it a certain way. There's federal rulemaking that occurs that takes time. You have to send that out to the public for comment. It comes back. You look at those things. The Office of Personnel Management and the Office of Management and Budget look at those things. And it is a slow process, but it's built that way for a reason, so that you don't have these sudden pendulum swings of one administration to another, changing everything in the way things work. Laws are made by Congress, enacted, and then rulemaking happens, and that's what puts those laws into place. So it takes time to change those things, and it should. It really should.
Yeah. Now, again, when you talk to the average person, they just want their government to work. And I've said before, I'm not for big government or small government, I'm for effective government. When I need something, we should get it. When we apply for Social Security, it shouldn't take months to get to. When a veteran needs benefits and needs to see a doctor, it shouldn't take months to get. We should be doing these things as a matter of course instead of a matter of politics. But sadly, it seems like this is what it all gets thrown into. And I brought up the VA. This week it came out that the Republicans threw on the table a 22% cut to the Veterans Administration. They're already 50,000 workers short. They're already understaffed, overworked. This would only make it that much. I think I saw 81,000 workers would be lost if that were to actually happen. 81,000 and 30 million fewer veterans outpatient visits. That's completely outrageous.
Yeah, and that's not the only part of government that'll be affected by this. This obviously is part of this idea of a debt ceiling fix. The debt ceiling essentially is you have to raise the debt ceiling because the interest rates and the spending has already been spent. That isn't on new spending. That's on paying your bills for the old spending. And so it goes up, and it has for years. And under President Trump and under President Biden and Obama, it went up. And this is some idea to cut either 3.5 trillion or 4.5 trillion, depending on what you read, of current government spending, taking government spending back to 2022. Problem is there's more veterans needing care now. There are other priorities going on. Certainly law enforcement expands. All of these various things happen, and you have to pay those bills, and you have to pay the employees to do it. So not even to say even inflation costs have gone up over the years since the pandemic, and that's been part of this increase as well. So to try to just draconianly cut across the board all this funding, no hearings, nobody's had a hearing, nobody's talked about federal spending, nobody's been called up the hill to, have a hearing in the House over how this would function. And this is what they do. This happens all the time with this. It seems like, and I'm trying not to stereotype, but Republican Congress comes in, and this is what they do. They put these across the board cuts, and they don't look at agency by agency. They don't look at programming. It's just all government bad. Let's cut it. And they find out sooner or later, though, that their constituents don't feel the same way.
Right, but here's the thing, and they've run on for decades now that government can't do anything, shouldn't do anything, that all spending is waste, fraud, and abuse. So on the surface, it doesn't matter to them because they don't believe government should do anything. But you're right, when the constituents find out that it means them. We put soldiers on a pedestal. You're heroes. All of this stuff, and then to say, well, we're not going to take care of you. When that rubber meets the road, do people really pay attention? Because you still got Republicans putting this out there.
It's the short memory, right? When the government shutdown hit under Trump in 2018, we had a 35-day government shutdown. By the end of that shutdown, people were starting to scream, both inside government and outside government, because passports couldn't get done. Various things that the public just relies upon couldn't get done. And so, they go down to their office and it's closed. They go out to a national park and it's closed. And they start to get upset. But again, I hate to say it this way, but you seem to have a schizophrenic population. They don't remember very long on these kind of things.
No, the last time this happened was the sequester back in 2013, when Boehner and company held the country hostage and got across the board cuts, 2%. I believe it was 2%, if I'm not mistaken, all across the board without asking what was being cut. And I make the argument that what happened in Benghazi had a lot to do with the fact that we were cutting funding across the board without going, hey, where's this funding coming from? Who's going to be harmed by it? This is my problem with these kind of, we've got a hammer and everything looks like a nail.
And this is kind of what they do each time. They promise their, in their campaign that this is what we're going to cut government spending. The problem is they don't identify it. Then when they get in, they don't have hearings. They don't bring people to the Hill to go through what it is we're actually doing. If there's some spending out there that they can find in certain agencies that is wasteful or not productive, then legislate that. But that's not what they're going to do here, because it's too hard.
Yeah,
it's too hard to do that.
It's too hard to legislate, so it's easier to hold people hostage. And using this tool, which I've talked about this debt ceiling for a very long time, because every time it comes up, we have this. And it seems to be Republicans more than Democrats using this as the ticking bomb, going, "Hey, we're willing to blow up the economy unless you give us what we want," which is more for rich people and less for working people. And it always seems to go their way on a certain level. So walk me through what a debt default would look like What happens to the federal government workers? Again, do you guys get thrown out in the curb, or you're working without paychecks? What does that look like?
Yeah, essentially, we go back to the same problem we had in 2018 with the debt ceiling. If they don't increase the debt ceiling to pay the current bills, then essentially everything starts to default. The appropriations process is done because obviously that's not going to move forward. And they're not going to be able to pay. It'll be similar to 2018 where they will order Bureau of Prisons employees into work without pay. They'll order TSA agents to work without pay, ICE agents, Border Patrol, you name it, the FBI. They will be told to come to work without pay. And that can only last for so long. And last time what happened, FAA, clearly the air traffic controllers, they were working with no pay with their essential workers, or what they call essential workers. And when they got tired of it, then the shutdown stopped because they started grounding planes on the eastern seaboard.
Yeah. And the thing that gets me is, I look at the debt ceiling and it seems like an artificial construct that we don't need. In my household, and I don't know about you, Phil, but before I spend any money, I make sure that I've allocated the resources to do it. I know I've spent it. I don't go back after I've spent it and go, you know what, I've decided I'm not going to pay for that. That's not how the real world works.
Yeah, then take your family budget, because there's certain Republican congressman that likes to use that phrase. All right, well, I bought a car. It was on payments. And so I decide, well, you know what? I'm tired of paying for that car. I'm not going to pay for it. Well, they're going to come get it. And it's no different than the government. They've obligated this spending. You have retirement, you have retirements they have to pay. You've got agency funding that has to be paid. You've got military contractors that have to be paid. All of these things that are obligated by the government have been already obligated. Yeah. You got to pay those payments. And again, they seem to think it's some sort of arbitrary thing. The one I read, one idea is to somehow prioritize, well, we'll only pay these bills. Well, it still defaults the government.
And what does that look like? Because we haven't touched that. I've made right from the beginning. I said I think right now we've got people in Congress who want to shoot the hostage. They want to push the button. They want to see what happens. They're the kid at the stove going, gee, I wonder if I put my hand on the hot stove, what happens? Do you think, like I do, that there are some who really want to push us into this? Because I'm just, it's the way I'm seeing it.
I absolutely think there's some that believe that they could force this and get either a huge amount of spending cuts, or default the government and see what happens. I think there's a core group in the Freedom Caucus that would love to see that. Or they think that, President Biden will blink or the Senate will blink. But I think we all heard even Senate Minority Leader McConnell made the comment early on. It's up to McCarthy. Whatever he does, he does. Yeah. I don't think he's even going to intercede in it. And that's a scary thing because he at least usually understands how to run government.
No, and this is the fear. The fear in this is, look, we're already struggling with high inflation. The economy is not great. It's moving in a better direction. Things are getting better. Jobs are being created. A default would be catastrophic. Every economist that I've talked to has said, this would just be the worst thing at the worst time. And then there's part of me goes, that's exactly what Republicans want, so they can blame Biden.
Well, I think they think that, and if you recall back in the 90s when we had a default, or not a default, we had a shutdown, they thought, Clinton would be blamed. When in the end, it was the House majority they were the ones holding up any type of deal, any type of funding. And the president has a larger mouthpiece, obviously. He has a larger voice out on the world stage. So this House majority, which only has 3 or 4 member, majority, does not have the megaphone that the White House has. And, they found out in the 90s what happens. I think each time, no matter you're on the Democratic side or The Republican side, the White House has a larger voice.
Yeah,
so you protest all you want.
Yeah, my fear in all this is has just come down to a way for people in their silos to make more money, to get more campaign cash, to get more exposure. Hey, look at me. And we working people end up getting the short end of the stick every single time. But Phil, I appreciate the time and the thoughts. As always, good stuff, my friend.
No, it was good to see you again, Rick, and thanks a lot.
Our good friend Phil Glover. He is the National Vice President for AFGE District 3. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1920. That was the day remembered in Butte, Montana as Bloody Wednesday, or the Anaconda Road Massacre. Butte was in the heart of copper mining country. By the turn of the century, Butte's population was 25% Irish. The Copper King of Montana was a man named Marcus Daly. He sat at the head of the Anaconda Mining Company. Workers simply called it the company. Hailing himself from Ireland, the County Cavan, the Copper King was known to prefer Irish workers. With the spread of electricity, copper wiring was in high demand. Then World War I grew demand even further, and the company was in the business of delivering that copper with little regard for workers' safety. This disregard resulted in tragedy. A fire in June of 1917 killed 168 workers at the Granite Copper Mine. Miners went out on strike demanding better safety. The company called in federal troops to return the workers to the mines. The industrial workers of the world arrived in Butte to help organize the miners. Unionization efforts were met with armed resistance from the company. Frank Little, an IWW organizer, was hanged from a railroad trestle. No one was held accountable. Finally, on April 19th, the workers had had enough. They went out on strike. 2 days later, hundreds of miners gathered in front of the Neversweet mine on Anaconda Road. They were met by Pinkerton detectives hired by the company. The company gun thugs fired into the crowd of workers, shooting many in the back as they tried to flee. 16 workers were wounded and 1 man died. The strike collapsed a few weeks later. Today's Labor History in 2 brought to you in memory of Carol Hillman, a passionate friend of workers and volunteer of the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's been interesting watching the Twitter debacle. And again, my favorite cartoon is there's a drawing of Elon Musk with a stick poking a dead bird going, come on, make money. And it's basically what he's done at this point. And look, maybe down the road he's going to figure out how to get people to continue to pay the $8. But interestingly enough, NBC News is reporting that there had been 407,000 legacy verified accounts, of which we here at the show were one. When the purge happened, out of those 407,000, there were less than 20 that paid the $8 to keep their little blue check mark. And I said from the beginning, anyone who was creating content for Twitter should not pay for it. Because you've made it worthless. It is, as I said yesterday, it's the scarlet letter. It's now for people who only want to own the libs or whatever their rationale was. But when you look at the fact that as this Travis Brown, and he's a programmer, somebody that people used to follow, he said there's only been a net increase of 28 of the legacy people, 28 people out of all of Twitter. Of the legacy people who were of the 407,000 who signed up for the Twitter Blue. I don't know that that's really enough money to keep Twitter going. Maybe it is. But what I found interesting is there were a bunch of tweets going out from people who they're verified. And one guy in particular, Joey Mananero is his name. He tweeted out, this MF paid for Twitter. That's his thing. I didn't say it. He said, No, I didn't pay for Twitter. I paid for free speech. That's what he tweeted out. He tweeted out he paid for free speech. Let that sink in for a second. He paid for free speech. He also went on to say, I paid for 1776 to commence again. I paid for the Founding Fathers' vision. I paid to tell Silicon Valley off. I paid to show support for the man who put himself in the firing line of the First Amendment. I paid because we support our own. He paid because he thinks if George Washington were alive today, George would pay too. I doubt that. But I go back to this. What you've done is you've made this verification worthless, because now what you've seen is a whole bunch of mock accounts, a whole bunch of Hillary Clinton got her blue check taken away, and now there's a bunch of Hillary Clintons out there with blue check marks. It's not her, it's not verified, but there's a bunch of people who put their name on it. And this is where you get into these moments. For instance, a group tweeted out with a blue check mark, a verified mark, this day in history, 1889, history's most lied about man was born. He lied because he dared to defy the global powers. He put his own people first. He loved his people more than any other statesman dared to love his people. To this day, war is waged against him. There's a picture of Adolf Hitler. And they're verified. The Auschwitz Memorial, they're not. So we're rewriting the history of World War II. We're rewriting the legacy of Hitler, and under a verified check. And the argument to the Auschwitz Memorial is, well, you should pay your $8. Then you could be verified too. And what? So you can be on the same level with the people who are spreading lies and misinformation? Seriously? The thing is the reason I find this blue checkmark thing so interesting is it used to be a reward for people who drove content, for people who created content, for people who had followings. That's what it was. Twitter wasn't paying you to drive people to Twitter. Twitter wasn't paying you to get views and all of that stuff. They gave you this little check. And what it said is this person is of some note. I remember being in, perfect example, I was in Madison, Wisconsin when the whole Scott Walker thing was going on. And there was a sign on the wall all over the place thanking CNN for telling everybody what was on Twitter, because CNN was following people on the ground, people that were notable, who were trustworthy, and they were reporting on that. They weren't on the ground. They were taking what was there. Now what we've done is we've taken what was a verification system, and we've thrown it completely on its end and made it completely worthless, which is why I've said I will not follow anyone who has a blue check. I will not retweet anything from anyone who has a blue check. I will not like anything from anyone who has a blue check, because you are participating in a system of disinformation. Because oddly enough, the number of these fake accounts who have verifications has gone through the roof, and it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse. And this is part of my problem with this whole system. When you have one guy who put himself in the line of fire to decide how much free speech costs and what you're going to do with the algorithm for free speech. I mean, a lot of people think that you tweet something out and all your followers see it. No, not so much. It's what the algorithm decides and what they want people to see. That's the frightening part of this, to have someone like Musk or any billionaire or anybody have that kind of control. Should be something that people are upset about, angry about, and not willing to participate in. Just my thoughts. Want to hear yours? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com.
The Sunshine State is still drying out from last week's historic rainfall. It's the gas pumps that are really dry.
Fort Lauderdale struggles with ripple effect from extreme weather disaster. Historic record-shattering heat in Asia has turned deadly. Plus,
our proposal would restore American energy leadership.
House Republicans hold U.S. clean energy sector hostage to raise the nation's debt limit.
All of those gangster stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
President Biden has a choice. Come to the table.
Or the economy gets it. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, we're always celebrating Earth Day around here at the Green News Report, but now everyone else gets to do it as well.
Yes, once again, a reminder that Saturday, April 22nd is Earth Day, with events in the U.S. and around the world celebrating our fragile little oasis of life in the vast desert of space.
Oh, that's nice.
In the nation's capital, activists are planning a protest and rally to end the era of fossil fuels, while House Republicans are marking Earth Day with attacks on renewable energy, endangered species protections, and more.
Of course they are.
House Republicans are floating a demand to repeal the entire Inflation Reduction Act, the Democrats' landmark climate law, in an attempt to extract concessions in exchange for the once routine raising of the nation's debt limit. But doing so will harm their own constituents. A new Financial Times analysis finds that Republican House districts are the biggest beneficiaries of Biden's new industrial policy, seeing the most investment from the Inflation Reduction Act by far, even though all Republicans voted against it.
You're sort of assuming that Republicans' constituents are the people who live in their districts as opposed to the fossil fuel companies who put money in their pockets.
Excellent point.
Thank you.
In Asia, an historic, record-shattering April heat wave has turned deadly. Affecting about a third of the world's population, the weeks-long searing heat has killed more than a dozen people in India and toppled April heat records across Southeast Asia and China. Thailand set a new all-time high national temperature record this week, hitting 114 degrees Fahrenheit for the first time in its history. Scientists say man-made climate change is making heat waves more intense, longer, and more frequent.
And didn't you also say in our last report that it was 96 in Connecticut this past week?
Yes, it was.
Oh, well, blue state, who cares?
In Florida, Fort Lauderdale is drying out after last week's biblical rains and floods, but it's now facing gas shortages. Another example of how climate extremes create unexpected knock-on effects. The floods temporarily disrupted distribution of gas and diesel fuel to retailers, but according to Gas Buddy CEO Patrick DeHaan in an interview with CBS, long gas lines in South Florida are really more of a people problem than a supply problem.
It turned into a panic buying spree, which overwhelmed the system. But I wouldn't say it's a shortage simply because there are millions of gallons of gasoline still waiting to be delivered at Port Everglades.
But of course, everyone's panicking. You know, it'll be really nice when we get rid of these gas cars altogether, and then people can panic about, I don't know, what music to play on the radio.
In energy news, a federal appeals court panel this week overturned Berkeley, California's first-in-the-nation ban on natural gas hookups in new construction in a lawsuit brought by the California Restaurant Association.
And heard by 2 Trump judges and a Reagan judge who used to work for Standard Oil.
The court ruled that the Berkeley ban conflicts with federal energy regulations. It could potentially jeopardize scores of similar ordinances around the country focused on phasing out fossil fuel use in new buildings. In the Netherlands on Wednesday, electricity market prices briefly turned negative because wind and solar generated so much clean electricity that they outstripped demand, forcing power producers to pay customers to take up the excess supply.
Sounds terrible.
Energy experts say such incidents are spurring accelerated investment in utility-scale battery storage in Europe.
I bet.
Finally, good news for the U.S. electric grid. A flood of new wind and solar power projects around the country, sparked by the Inflation Reduction Act, has increased the backlog for projects awaiting a connection to the electric grid, due in part to the lack of transmission lines. But Bloomberg News reports that suddenly several major transcontinental transmission projects are now moving forward in every region. And the Interior Department this week gave the final go-ahead for the Trans-West Express high-voltage transmission line after 15 years of permitting work. The 730-mile transmission line from the nation's biggest wind farm, now under construction in Wyoming, will bring pollution-free electricity to Nevada and California.
Well, sounds terrible. No wonder Republicans want to bring an end to this nightmare. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So interestingly enough, President Biden is, I guess, going to sign an executive order in the coming weeks that would limit the investment from U.S. companies into parts of China. This seems, I don't know, to steal a Bidenism, this seems like a pretty big freaking deal. And here to share some thoughts on just how big of a deal this could be, and maybe we should get behind it. Just a thought. I've asked our good friend Emily de la Bruyere to come talk with us. She's a co-founder of Horizon Advisory. HorizonAdvisory.org is their website. Emily, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for having me.
So how big of a deal is this? I mean, I'm looking at this and I'm going, wow, this seems like a pretty big freaking deal.
Short answer, yes. Big to this effort, challenges in terms of pushback that's already been evident over the past few months, even years, as this, in parallel, the executive order being developed by the administration and efforts to hit the same objective in Congress as those have moved along. There's been a ton of pushback, which really underscores the degree of co-option of relevant players by China. That's one of the key obstacles. There's going to be a huge oversight, monitoring, et cetera, obstacle. There's the difficulty of the scope that's currently assigned to this executive order and making it bigger. But then the big underlying thing too is that the U.S. also has to solve the problem of China investing in America. And we haven't quite done that yet. So those are all like the problems, but the short answer is yes, this is a huge deal. And it's a really, really powerful message to the private sector to stop sneaking around corners and to actually.
No, when I read this, Emily,
do the right thing, but not get punished.
Yeah, when I read this, or initially, my mind before I read the whole article was, finally we're going to stop allowing the Chinese to come and buy up our farmland and our companies and buy us up from within. It's not what that is. This is outward money going to China from U.S. companies, which again, there's part of me that goes, this is what we should be. We should have been, as consumers, as the public, holding these companies accountable and boycotting, protesting, whatever. I mean, we're a country where you put a transgender woman's face on a beer can and people lose their minds, but yet move the factory, move industries, just free market.
And we should still be, right? Because actions by the government to this end are only going to go so far and are only going to be so effective. And ultimately, in America, what's going to make this decision and what's going to force companies to actually act in the national interest and the people's interest, that's the people stepping up and saying this isn't cool.
Yeah.
So we absolutely have to make that the narrative and start calling out, boycotting, protesting the companies that are busy selling the country to China.
I had a conservative friend tell me that this was an act of war. That we're sending a signal to China that they are now the enemy. Do you see it the same way?
That's a tough question because there are a bunch of different angles there. Is China the enemy? And are we? Yes. Are we sending powerful enough a signal that they are? I'm not sure. And I guess the element I would add here is that, as we were chit-chatting a little bit before just now, and you mentioned Yellen, and Yellen kind of backpedaling or arguing against or warning against efforts to really decouple the US and Chinese economies. If we have important parts of government doing that and watering down our position on China, then are we actually signaling an act of war? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's this weird thing, because I was going to bring up the Yellen piece that's saying, warning against us decoupling because it might send that message. But look, I think we've been at war with China for a very long time. It's just been an economic war, and we've been losing because I don't think we've been prepared for what was coming and what was happening. And I don't think people paid attention. They were just happy to get a basket full of cheap stuff at Walmart. And never mind all the job losses, never mind the broken communities, never mind all the horrible negative stuff that was happening. The majority of us were getting cheap junk, Emily. So we were happy. And you know what? It ain't cheap no more.
Yes. And also, just to your initial point, we've been at war with China. China's been at war with us. And China's been so clear about that and is so clear about that. Basically everything, whether it's industrial policy or foreign policy, that's framed out in the Chinese system is framed out in an effort to compete with us and to beat us. And they're just that focused in their approach. And we're busy scattered all over the place, plus dealing with all the obstacles that they've already thrown our way, because whether we realize it or not, thanks to everything you've said, thanks to the hollowing out of the American industrial base, thanks to the job loss, thanks to the inequality that's resulted in the polarization, we're actually off balance as we try to grapple with China's threat.
Because this is one of those things where, both the right and the left, Democrats, Republicans, red hat, blue hats, this is, I think, an issue that we should be uniting around. This seems to me to be that call, that national call to action, to save the future of our economy, to save our industrial base, to leave something for our children, and not end up being hollowed out from within. This seems to me to be something that we could rally around. No?
Absolutely. I mean, it's mind-blowing. First of all, China at this point is a bipartisan issue. Everything that actually competing with China means doing and means responding to and means recognizing with a problem, those are bipartisan issues. That's jobs, that's the health of the economy.
But why is this an executive order? This is my problem with it. The president can only get something done from now till the end of his term via executive order. There's going to be nothing positive passed. This could have been, everyone coming together and going, we're all going to do this, so that it isn't just Biden doing it through an executive order. Or am I misreading this?
So you're not misreading in terms of this should be legislation. I will say, though, this isn't even a question of polarization. This isn't a two sides of the aisle issue. What this is in both camps, the parties that are co-opted by either directly co-opted by China or co-opted by the finance entities that are themselves co-opted with China. This is them.
So it's the money again. It's not right, left, as we say. It's top down.
Precisely. Yes. And that's the real threat here. We have a common adversary. We should be able to unite and take action against it as a country. The issue is that common adversary has also co-opted some really, really important power bases in our country.
That's frightening. And look, I give the president credit for taking this on. This could have been something you just let the Congress do, but the fact that there's going to be an executive order tells me at least he understands that there's a problem.
Yes. And even if it's been watered down, is actually trying to make this a priority.
You listen to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Emily De La Brea. She's a co-founder of Horizon Advisory, horizonadvisory.org, the website. Make sure you check out the work she does there. The war frame came to light last week. Evidently in New York, there's something they call police stations for the Chinese. The FBI arrested, I guess it was the FBI arrested some people, two guys, charges of conspiring to act as agents for China and obstruction of justice. Police departments, Chinese police departments in New York and in major cities, is that really happening?
It's really happening. China has overseas police stations all over the world, including in the US, that are what they literally do is enforce the rule, the oversight, the control of the Chinese Communist Party within American borders all across the globe.
Why isn't this a bigger story? I mean, I haven't seen anything on the F channel. I haven't seen anything on the CNN or any of them. I happened to somebody emailed me and said, "Hey, there's a press conference." That's how I found out about it. A listener emailed it to me. Why isn't this the issue?
I don't know, especially considering that it's the narrative here is pretty amazing. You get to hear about people, you get to hear about an FBI raid. But it's pretty shocking, especially because this isn't a new phenomenon. So Canada, for example, discovered overseas police stations there months ago, and actually there was an uproar over that. Same thing in Europe. But still, if you stop somebody in the street and you said, "Hey, did you hear about those Chinese overseas police stations?" I don't think there would be a whole lot of recognition. So I don't know why it's not a huge story. It should be.
So are they snatching people up? Are they issuing citations? What's the mission of these? Just to scare the what out of people? I'm curious. The point.
Yeah, the biggest line of effort that they conduct is coercing Chinese nationals or people with ties to China in the United States or wherever they're based. So in this case, the New York City case, what's come out thus far is that what they were doing was cracking down on dissidents in the United States, including pro-democracy activists. And a lot of the stories that have come out, what you hear about is these, the overseas police officers, we'll call them. I don't even want to give them that respect, but agents, thank you. Bringing people in, threatening their families that are still in China, making lists of dissidents and otherwise coercing them. So it's primarily oversight, again, on Chinese-tied individuals.
Yeah, so this sounds an awful lot like, I'm a little bit older. I remember the Soviet era. This sounds like a lot of the stories we heard of the Soviet era and the KGB and things that we heard may have been happening here. This we actually know is happening.
Yes. And I also think that we need to recognize as we look at this story right now, that that's where these Chinese overseas police stations are starting. There's the next question of where are they going to end? Beijing wants international control. And it wants international control, not only of Chinese nationals, people with families in China, but of everybody. This is what they do now because that's a priority and it's what they're able to do. But what we should be seeing when we see the police stations is a Chinese effort to apply its control, its authority all over the world.
Here's my problem with all of this. Again, you're seeing these stories coming around, China and Russia and India and Brazil and now Saudi Arabia all talking about their own currency. I see the story of China and India laundering Russian oil and reselling it to Western states. It seems like we're kind of divvying the world back up into kind of a Cold War scenario, and I'm concerned by what I see, especially coming out of Republicans about Ukraine, and I'm worried where we're going to be at the end of the road when it comes to Ukraine, and then how that plays out with Russia and China and all does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And to my mind, as this divvying up happens, or you look at how where countries are positioning, it's scary. And it's especially scary because the US seems to be failing in a pretty spectacular way at offering a compelling story or opportunity to countries to side with America. And it's failing even when it comes to our closest allies and partners. Like, it's really, really not a good thing that the French president went out to China a couple weeks ago and played nice with Xi Jinping for a week. That's really bad. And that he did that and explicitly said that France was positioning itself as separate from the US and its China policy. And I think that reflects this real US failure to explain to its friends and to just generally other countries why they should believe in a U.S.-led world order, or why should they should just not believe in a Chinese-led world order.
No, that excellent. But is that Biden's fault? I mean, because I'm getting a lot of people going, Biden's weak and Biden's making us look weak internationally, and all of this is Biden's fault. Does this fall on his doorstep? I mean, he's president. The buck stops there. But in all actuality, we've been moving in this direction for a while, giving away our manufacturing base, opening up our borders, taking on massive debt from China, all of this, allowing them to come in and infiltrate all around. Is it his fault, though? I mean, is it his responsibility ultimately?
Right now, yes. It's also been the fault of his predecessors. And even as there's been this new awareness of China as a threat, this new effort to compete with China, American policy has just failed to do anything other than play defense and really do anything other than have sticks. And that's true of the Biden administration. It's also been true before him.
See, I would argue no sticks. I would argue all carrots.
Really?
No, we keep giving stuff away. Oh, be nice to us. Let us here's more. Take our manufacturing. Yeah, let U.S. corporations go over there, get their intellectual property stolen, and then come back and complain about it. I don't know that has there been any sticks? I mean, I guess the tariffs a little bit.
Those are carrots vice China. I mean carrots for U.S. and allied entities to not deal with China. And there needs to be some of that, right? Like, at a certain point, you can't just give candy for normal behavior. But there has to be here's a proactive vision that you can be part of. Here's a positive thing for the future that's going to make you better off as well as us better off. And that story just isn't there from the U.S. perspective and in U.S.-China policy. And you can only go so far with China's bad, especially when it comes to convincing allies and partners that are frustrated with America. And frankly, that are just pissed off after decades of dealing with us.
So last line of questioning I've got for you then, if you're advising Joe Biden, what does he do? I mean, I see, bringing back trying to reshore some manufacturing is important. I look at this executive order that's coming down the pike as something possible, as moving us in a direction. What more should he be doing?
Yeah, and those are really critical places to start. There are a ton of tactical elements at both of those levels that I think are really important to bring on board. Like, if we're going to be reshoring manufacturing, let's not let any of that money go to Chinese entities. Let's also start at areas of value chains that we can make such that we can make the entire value chain free of Chinese control. Let's not start halfway such that every input is going to be bought from China, right? There are little tactical things like that. If that's even little. There's also just going back to this point, though, the point of a proactive vision. As we do that, as we say we're going to create trusted value chains, we're going to use either direct government investment or government shaping of incentives and regulations to this end, we also need to be working with American allies and partners. And we're kind of getting there, but we're getting there in this whack-a-mole and haphazard way that's actually alienating a lot of really critical countries that we need to work with.
And how do you do that, with our political system, where we seem to be maybe swinging a little bit on the pendulum, where you don't know what our direction is. You don't know what if our word means anything. We had the former guy. You've got Biden now. There's the threat of the former guy possibly coming back or someone worse. So who knows where the U.S. stands on any of this? And I can see how that can be destabilizing.
Yes, but on the other hand, the one thing that's a constant, even in recent pendulum swings, has been our China policy. And I think that can be communicated, and that's understood by American allies and partners and can be communicated to them. And I think what it really means doing is, when the U.S. develops a big policy, whether that has to do with new defense measures against China or investment in trusted industry, the U.S. just also has to think about the international element of that, the allies and partners element of that, and communicate as much to them and bring them into the circle.
Well, we'll see. I think we're stepping, baby steps. I'm hope there's much more, and I'm hoping the administration is listening and taking your advice. Emily, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, Texas, the land of perfection. Everybody's fed. No children are going hungry. No veterans are homeless. No homeless on the streets. Everyone's got clean energy. They've solved all their infrastructure problems. Schools are well funded. Hospitals are flush with beds and staff, and it's a utopia. So the Texas Senate has time to go and pass a piece of legislation mandating that every public school classroom, everyone, has a prominently displayed copy of the Ten Commandments. Not only that, it's got to be a particular size, at least 16 inches wide by 20 inches high, and it's got to be prominently displayed. And letters high enough that people with average eyesight, that's right, people with average eyesight are able to view it. Average vision from anywhere in the classroom. No obstructions. Can't hide it behind the flag. Can't put it it's got to be, everyone can see it all the time, every minute. And they even enumerated what the Ten Commandments are. Good for them. Now, I do have a problem with it because some of the wording's different than the Ten Commandments that I learned as a kid. So I got to tell you, I'm feeling a little put out because they're not my Ten Commandments. But here they are. The one I got that I find interesting is they write, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife," and that's where it always ended for me. Don't cheat on your neighbor's wife. Don't cheat with your neighbor's wife. But they've added, "nor his manservant." Huh? What? Nor his maidservant. Okay, nor his cattle, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. I guess I'm coveting. Okay, don't covet. This is going to be, put in every classroom because we have to. And I have this theory, and I interviewed a guy a number of years ago, a pastor, who was big on the right-wing circuit for a while. His name was Pastor James David Manning. And, we had this conversation about him being a big supporter of Roy Moore, who at the time was being thrown off the Supreme Court because he had that giant monument of the Ten Commandments out front. And he was told to remove it, and he refused to. And I said, look, I have this theory. I have a theory that people who want the Ten Commandments plastered everywhere are people who don't know it, don't know the Ten Commandments. So can you tell me what they are? And he went, I got the book right here. I can read it to you. And I go, no, I don't want you to read it to me. I want you to tell me what they are in your words, and even make up words if you have to. And he, adamant, I'm going to read them to you. And I'm go, so what you're telling me is you don't know them. And this is my problem with people who want them plastered everywhere. They need that constant reminder to be decent people. The sad thing is even when you plaster them all over the place, they're not decent people. They're willing to let children go hungry. They're willing to let people, be homeless. They're willing to let a lot of the negative things happen, even though we've got the rules. And this has always been frustrating to me. Now, am I angry that they're going to put it? No, I don't care. Is it going to harm me if the Ten Commandments are there? No, I already know them. But what do you do with people who don't believe? What about that whole separation of church and state thing? And shouldn't it be the parents' responsibility to teach their children to be decent, to teach them the golden rule, or at least the silver one? I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1920. That was the day remembered in Butte, Montana as Bloody Wednesday, or the Anaconda Road Massacre. Butte was in the heart of copper mining country. By the turn of the century, Butte's population was 25% Irish. The Copper King of Montana was a man named Marcus Daly. He sat at the head of the Anaconda Mining Company. Workers simply called it the company. Hailing himself from Ireland, the County Cavan, the Copper King was known to prefer Irish workers. With the spread of electricity, copper wiring was in high demand. Then World War I grew demand even further, and the company was in the business of delivering that copper with little regard for workers' safety. This disregard resulted in tragedy. A fire in June of 1917 killed 168 workers at the Granite Copper Mine. Miners went out on strike demanding better safety. The company called in federal troops to return the workers to the mines. The industrial workers of the world arrived in Butte to help organize the miners. Unionization efforts were met with armed resistance from the company. Frank Little, an IWW organizer, was hanged from a railroad trestle. No one was held accountable. Finally, on April 19th, the workers had had enough. They went out on strike. 2 days later, hundreds of miners gathered in front of the Neversweet mine on Anaconda Road. They were met by Pinkerton detectives hired by the company. The company gun thugs fired into the crowd of workers, shooting many in the back as they tried to flee. 16 workers were wounded and 1 man died. The strike collapsed a few weeks later. Today's Labor History in 2 brought to you in memory of Carol Hillman, a passionate friend of workers and volunteer of the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
These days, America's top economic officials tend to speak in intelligible bureaucratic gobbledygook. But once upon a time, there was a plain-spoken White House economist, and he even had a sense of humor. He didn't last. Alfred Kahn was chastised by the White House in 1978 for speaking clearly and honestly about the looming possibility of a depression. Too blunt, use softer words. So Kahn started calling the downturn a looming banana. When banana industry lobbyists complained, he switched to kumquat. In that spirit, let me warn you about an unemployment taco that the autocratic Federal Reserve System is cooking up for working families. The Fed, as it's called by jolly bankers who run it, say it's imposing, quote, the restoration between supply and demand in the labor market. They soothingly add that there will very likely be some softening in the labor market conditions. You can almost hear them humming Rockabye Baby, but don't nod off. As Bryce Covert, the insightful economic digger and truth-teller, recently explained, there's nothing soft about the Fed's arbitrary policy. It means fewer raises and more people out of work, which means about 1.5 million people will lose their jobs. She documents that, historically, such a jolt of unemployment will probably, get ready for scary words, trigger a recession, or a taco if that makes you feel better. The mumbo-jumbo of economists aside, what we have here is the same old power play of moneyed elites putting the jobs and wages of working families on the chopping block to jack up the exorbitant profits of monopolistic corporations. When the Fed bankers say they're restoring balance, they mean restoring the power of corporate bosses to rule unilaterally over America's workaday majority. This is Jim Hightower saying, in plain language, this is blatant class war by the privileged few against the many.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So interestingly enough, Smartmatic, the company that's also suing the F channel, the reports coming out now from this is they want actually more than the $787 million that Fox agreed to pay Dominion. They want much more. And there's part of me goes, they should get it. Because ultimately, didn't they accuse Smartmatic of digging up a dead guy? You know, Hugo Chavez, and wasn't that a whole thing that was attached to Smartmatic that they dug up this dead guy to do this? Going to be interesting to see again how these all play out. And here to share some thoughts on whether he thinks they'll get it or not, I've asked our good friend Bob Ney to come talk with us, former Ohio congressman and political analyst. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick.
So what do you think of this? You seeing another 787, or are we going to see more? Because Smartmatic's what, $2.7 billion they're seeking in damages?
Right. Well, I guess that Chavez didn't help him very much.
He was only dead for, what, 10 years?
10 years. I don't know. But I think the main point of Dominion that I thought this out in a conversation with a lawyer about a month and a half ago, and I think that he was accurate with it, is that you've got a scenario where Fox knew it was in trouble. It didn't want all the emails revealed. I mean, we already know some of them, and they were horrific. Shows the internal problems of Fox and their entertainment hosts versus the management, et cetera. But in those, beyond those, you can bet that Fox said, okay, we're going to pay you, this X amount of money, and we want a gag order, and we didn't want it known that we paid this. And you can imagine Dominion lawyers, once Fox said we're going to pay, said, no, we're not going to do a gag order. We'll go to court. So that's the power of this lawsuit, if you think about it. Now, of course, you've got Systematic, who obviously is going to be pretty emboldened, I would say, looking at what happened with Dominion. And they're talking about Systematic or Smartmatic, is talking about getting an apology, the full retraction, et cetera, et cetera. So we will see where this one goes. But, if I were their lawyers, wouldn't you ask for more money?
Oh, absolutely. Especially when you're talking about you're blaming it on a dead guy. Because here's the thing, and I've had a bunch of people say, well, you should be afraid of this because, now they're going to be coming after you and everybody else. And I'm going, no, bias is not illegal. Bias is not the issue here. Because I've had a bunch of people, well, CNN's biased, MSNBC's biased. And you go, yeah, but lying is what they did. They outwardly were saying something that quietly they were going, it's all bunk. That's the difference to me.
Well, and also right now, I think that we have to realize that Smartmatic has a floor, and they're starting at, the payoff to Dominion. That's the floor. And then on top of it, they're going to want a retraction. They're going to want an apology. They're going to want more because they're going to go into a jury trial. And obviously they know that there was a settlement. So it's going to be, Katie bar the door from there. And I don't know. We'll see.
It's a good thing.
I can't imagine unless there were no emails that were talking, directly about Smartmatic, but I doubt that.
Yeah, I guess from what I've been told is, for people who watch the F channel, that they don't name anybody. They just, it's the election companies, it's the voting machine companies, it's that stuff. They're now, it's not individual ones, it's all of them, which I think will be interesting to see where that goes. But it's a good thing that Fox has got deep pockets.
Well, even for Fox, though, this is a great portion of their income. And if you add this one on top of Dominion, then they could be at 60-some% of revenue that they made. And it'll be interesting. They're not going to want to do that, obviously, but they're going to have a hearing in Manhattan next week, and this will bring out any evidentiary issues in the case. And we're going to know a lot more next week when those issues come out there. Now, Fox is arguing that this wasn't the same, that that this is way overblown and it's not plausible for any form of damage they had. But again, next week starts a process. We will see what Fox will do.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to next week. I want to get your thought on this Hunter Biden stuff. I've taken a position for a while. I don't care. It's okay. It's the president's son did some dumb stuff. We've had, politicians' kids do dumb stuff. It's not the end of humanity, but this story keeps getting bigger and bigger. I don't know how much of it is true. It just seems to me, wouldn't it be smart just to get on with it already?
Well, I think you're right because, look, Hunter Biden's lawyers this has been, I think today in the media, that they're going to meet with Justice Department next week, which happens. I've been down this path. Your lawyers start to meet with Justice Department. They're feeling each other out. Where are we going to be on this? What are you looking at? Now, a leak just came, of course, in the last 24 hours, and people say, a leak? Well, yes, justice leaks. Yes, they do. They do things. And this leak came about supposedly internally where FBI agents are saying, why didn't you do something with him? How come this hasn't been done? So when you start to see these types of things, usually indicates somebody in the Justice Department. It doesn't mean that it's, the Attorney General Garland, but somebody in there is beginning to try to put some kind of pressure. What you just said about, getting, being out here and meeting and everything, I think it's appropriate. I mean, on the political side of this, if there's a tax implication problem, and if he lied on a form when he got a firearm, because you do have to put down whether you had drug issues or not. And by the way, I personally know somebody when I was in Morgantown Federal Corrections that they nailed for smoking one joint at a party 10 years before, and then he signed for his gun application. So I do know of cases where they got him for a year. I don't know. If I were they, I'm not they, I would just get this out here and get it over with. This is not the type of thing, if justice is going to actually move on or the IRS is moving about income tax, I don't think it's the type of thing you want in the middle of 2024. Yeah. You want it out there. It'll be debated. And then after a while, I just don't think it would be the subject of ads. Other people's family members have done things. So I would assume this should just get out there and get done, whichever way it goes.
I don't think it'll be ads, but I think the right-wing, blogosphere, the right-wing talk radio people, all of the F channels of the world. This is a conspiracy, Bob. Biden's influencing the Justice Department to save his child and himself because he's the big guy. Remember, 10% of the big guy, I guess, is their battle cry.
Well, I mean, look, the Justice Department can move slow on its own without,
Tell me about it.
From the White House. I went through, think about this, 2 years solid of lawyers and meetings and subpoenas and grand juries, 2 years. All of us did involved in that Abramoff case. And to come to, in my case, a deal of 18 months. So you would think after 2 years it would be like, you're going to do your 35 years, but it was, that's the way the department operates. Yeah. And without any interference from the White House, the department will operate normally slow.
We'll see how that goes. I just think it's such a massive distraction. Kids do all kinds of stuff, unless they. And I said from the beginning, unless they can tie this back to Biden, that he did all the things that now the conspiracy people are telling me, I think it's a non-issue.
Again, if in the middle of 2024 towards the end all this goes down, obviously the publicity's fresh. I would assume anything that happens. If it happens now, some type of negotiation, which happens, that's what we did with the Justice Department, then it happens. And, another year passes, then it does become quite legitimately, politically, old news.
Yeah. I want to get your thoughts on President Biden's executive order on environmental justice, this idea that they're going to address higher pollution areas, that in places where people of color are, in poverty areas, that this new directive, I guess, is going to have agencies identify and address data and science to kind of make the environment better in some places. Is all we're going to get for the next year and a half, or whatever, executive orders out of the administration?
Well, I think so. This one, which was signed today, directs every single federal agency to work towards environmental justice for all, improve the lives of communities hit hardest by toxic pollution and climate change. Now, that can be any community, it's minority community or not. So it's being touted, of course, as as something that's helping the minority community. But again, it can be something that helps everybody. It's hard to, in particular, if you look at New York City itself, it's got pollution that would be or Los Angeles quite involved. But
no matter where you no matter what you sign, you're still not going to put the toxic waste dump in the good address. You're still not getting by the gated communities. You're still going to be where land is cheap, and people are starved for development. So I see this and I'm going, I'm in favor of the idea. In practice, is it going to matter?
Well, that was kind of the point I'm making, that you'll have the government doing this, but will the government still say to an agency, okay, by the way, this next waste dump's going to be in the middle of Rodeo Drive, California? I don't think so. It's going to be more in somewhere, where we're from, in Appalachia or something of that nature. That's the way these are run. But it's okay cause. To your point, yes, I think that probably, and these are going to be debated in court. We know that. That's what happens with executive orders. But I don't think you're going to see anything in particular that's going to be coming out of the United States Congress. So anything that happens is going to be, by executive order. Look at immigration. Anything that happened was by executive order.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go back through the last three presidents, that's what happens. Now, there are some things that Congress, has passed. For example, the stimulus, and we could go through a few things. But on policies like this, I think they're going to be few and far between. Unless they're executive order, you're not going to have anybody focus on it. And it's a noble cause. Look, to also on the other side of this, of minority justice and in poorer communities, it is a noble cause to try to at least target something and make, some bit of sensitivity to the issue.
No. Look, as a kid growing up in the projects, we were in a high pollution area. I remember, I suffered from asthma horribly as a kid because of the airplane traffic, the factories, and all of the air pollution that we had. So maybe trying to make that a little bit lesser is a great idea, especially as we're looking for just before Earth Day. You got any big plans for Earth Day? You going to be out planting a tree, doing anything like that?
I don't think so. I've never been a joiner of any day. I respect them, but I just I'm not. I'm probably having a nice lunch though, and I will not throw the wrappers or anything on the ground. I promise that.
See, this is where just being a decent person, you don't need a specific day. Just every day be a decent person.
That's true.
Last thing I wanted to get with you on, there was a story. I guess it was over. What is it? I think it was maybe Politico, if I'm not mistaken, or actually the Wall Street Journal. Basically asking the question how wealthy our Supreme Court justices are. Is this something that we should know? I mean, is this something that should come up? And I guess we talked about Dick Durbin inviting John Roberts to come and testify. I think this is kind of something that we've never discussed before.
Well, the justices listed, I think it wasn't between 24 million and like 70 million in assets they listed.
Right. It was Bloomberg, actually. 24 million and 68 million, they said.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Which is kind of a big gap.
Yeah, sure is. And so like any person that's in any public position, which Supreme Court, of course, is, it should meet the standards that everybody else meets. Members of Congress will list their net worth and their worth. Now, of course, that led to other issues in Congress because of the fact of, the stocks and not having to, list certain things. And I think it needs to be made clear to members of Congress have blind trusts, how blind are those trusts, et cetera. And then that allows the government from the justice end to see if anybody's doing any manipulation, or unfair stock tips or something of that nature. So having said that, there's financial disclosures for members and financial disclosures for, judges. So I don't know why the Supreme Court wouldn't have to say, where its money comes from. Now, as far as, when I was in Congress, there were members that had a lot of money and members that had money but not a lot of money, if that makes sense. They made a decent salary, but maybe I knew one from Pennsylvania, Mike Doyle, had 5 kids, So when you start to look at the salary, he obviously wasn't one of the wealthier ones. But I think it's good to see what they are worth, because then if all of a sudden you go in and you're worth a certain amount and you've accumulated, $15 million worth of wealth, then I think people have the right to know, where did it come from.
I think so as well. And I found out that John Roberts is our richest Supreme Court justice. Some, between 9 and 27 million, which again seems like a big difference. I think I would rather be closer to the 27 than the 9. And our poorest justice being Brett Kavanaugh, somewhere between a net worth of $15,000 and $65,000.
I'll take half of that. I'll be okay with half of that.
Wish I had that too. There you go. Bob, I appreciate the time. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too. Thank you.
Our good friend Bob Ney. Look, I look at this and I'm going, I still got questions on who paid off the debts, because Brett Kavanaugh now has a positive asset of $15,000 to $65,000. Who paid it off? That's the question. Quick break. Right back to wrap things up. Stick around. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1894. The nation was in the grips of depression. Unemployment soared. Workers' wages and hours were cut dramatically in virtually every industry. Coal miners were especially hard hit. At a meeting in Columbus, Ohio, the United Mine Workers of America called for a nationwide strike. Even though the union had only about 20,000 official members, more than 6 times that many walked off the job. The strike stretched from Washington State to Alabama to the Appalachian coal fields. Violent skirmishes broke out when scab workers attempted to enter the mines and replace the striking miners. One such example occurred near Uniontown, Pennsylvania, where armed guards killed 5 striking workers and wounded 8 more. In 5 states, the militia was called out due to the unrest. Where the strikers were not able to turn away the scab labor, they employed a different tactic. They attempted to stop the delivery of the mined coal. In Illinois, for example, striking miners piled railroad ties and other debris on the railroad tracks to stop the coal trains from running. This interference with the trains meant that the federal government had the justification it needed to enter the struggle. A U.S. judge ordered an end to stopping train traffic. The New York Times declared the power of the federal government being behind the writ, all the force necessary to move the train will be used. The strike stretched on for weeks, but in the end, the strikers could not combat the coal mine owners, local militias, hired security, and scab labor. The strike was broken. The United Mine Workers faced a severe setback to their organizing that was not overcome for more than 2 decades. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Like us on Facebook and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So interesting story, something we're going to be talking about a lot next week. The 12 unions that represent the workers, more than 100,000 workers in the railroad industry, they've come out and they've said collectively the 6 biggest freight railroads, they have spent $165 billion on stock buybacks, which is way above the $119 billion they've spent on upgrading their facilities, maintaining their tracks, investing in their business. So they've taken more out than they've actually put in. Now, remember, we give them these big tax breaks under the idea that we're gonna get investments and make things more efficient and pay workers better, and it's gonna be better. It's gonna be better for society. When all we find out is they're pocketing more for them, less for everybody else. And this, you could bring prices down. Remember that inflation word? That $165 billion could have been bringing prices down, but no, we're going to give it to the rich people to put in their pockets. And why? Because they prefer stock buybacks over dividends, because they got to pay tax on dividends. Dividends is taxed differently. And surprise, surprise, we're going to ensure that the wealthy get what they want. Now, these stock buybacks are taxed. President Biden at the beginning of the year did get that 1% tax, that whopping 1%. That was the best he could get. So I find it interesting that this is going to be, and this is happening. And like I said, I'm going to spend a lot of time on this next week, because this is the kind of stuff that's been screwing over working people. This is the kind of stuff that's just been infuriating to me. And again, we're arguing over all of the fringe stuff while getting robbed blind. I want to finish off today's program with a story out of Republic, Missouri. This is, again, I got to finish off on a gun story for the week. Larry Gene Gay is his name. He's a 70-year-old from Springfield, Missouri. Evidently just wanted to go to the local Price Chopper. Wanted to get some steaks. And what's wrong with that? What's wrong with a guy a 70-year-old guy going, you know what? I want me a steak. Weekends coming. You want to make sure that friends and family are well fed. Gonna throw something on the grill. Who could be against that? Problem is, the Price Cutter. It's not Price Chopper. It's Price Cutter. Evidently, the meat department was closed. So he was angry. He was a little upset. Wanted his steaks, man. Didn't want the ones that were on the rack. Wanted the ones from the window, I guess. So he showed the clerk behind the counter a gun. Flashed a gun to the clerk. Now, this is the funny part. When they were interrogating him, the officer asked him why he thought the people at the store had called the police on them and said that he was threatening them with a gun. And his response is, I don't know. I have no idea. He just wanted some steaks. He seemed to think in his mind that just showing him his gun, and I guess he said that I'm not stealing anything. I just need you here to help me get these steaks. I'm not going to hurt you. I think he thought that was okay. That's how we do things in America. Let me ask you, if you're behind the counter and someone shows you a gun, are you going to be more likely or less likely to help them? And would you call the police? Now, me personally, I'm going to be hyper nice to them. I'm going to get them whatever they want while we're calling the police. Because one, I don't want to get shot. I don't know how crazy this guy is, especially with all the news that's out today of people going, I'm a good guy with a gun. And is this normal? I know I read it and I laughed because it's kind of funny. But this is what the gun culture has gotten us to. People being irresponsible at every level. Look, you could make an argument that, someone ringing the doorbell frightened someone, and that's going to be their argument. That the guy was afraid and that he was pulling on the door. He was making aggressive moves, so he had to shoot him because he was in fear for his life. You could make the argument the guy, the car pulled in the driveway. Hey, no one ever comes out here. I had to shoot her. I guess you could make that argument. I don't think you can do it with a straight face. But how can you defend? I went into the Price Cutter and flashed my piece because I wanted a steak. Wow. Is this where we're heading? Is this the natural destination? And does it get worse? I sure hope not. Because, man, wow. But good on you, Gay. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out because he's been charged with one felony count of unlawful use of a weapon and one felony count of armed criminal action. Chances are he's going to get a lot of meat. Probably not the kind he wanted. Going to take a quick break. Back after this. We'll see you back here next time. Make sure you grab the podcast.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.